I need you to picture something for me before I take you back to where this all began. Picture a woman sitting at a kitchen table in a public housing apartment on the 3rd floor in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. She is 75 years old. She is wearing a turquoise blouse she saves for special days. Her hands are on a kitchen table between a telephone and a small tin box she pulled from the closet and set in front of her not 5 minutes ago. There is a man sitting across from her who has been her husband for 41 years. And on that table, between his hands and hers, there is a phone playing a recording. His voice is coming out of it, his words, his plan. All of it laid out in his own careful, unhurried tone, like he is reading terms from a lease agreement. He is going gray at the temples. He is wearing the navy sports coat he wore to church the last time he went to church, which was 3 Easters ago. He is looking at that phone on the table the way a man looks at something he was certain was buried. And I am looking at him, not saying a word, because there is nothing left to say that the recording has not already said for me. That is where this story ends. Now let me take you to where it begins. It was a Tuesday in April. Spring, the kind of spring Philadelphia gets after a long gray winter when the air finally breaks and something changes in the city, the way something changes in a person when they decide to keep going. The windows of my apartment on the 3rd floor were open for the first time since October. I could smell the magnolia tree in the courtyard below. I could hear children on the sidewalk, and somewhere down the block a radio playing something with a soft, steady beat. I was folding laundry at the kitchen table with the TV on low. An old habit from decades of living with sound in the background. The television wasn't really for watching. It was for keeping the silence from getting too heavy. I had on my turquoise blouse because it was our anniversary month, and I had woken up that morning feeling something I had not felt in a long time, which was hopeful. 41 years of marriage, and there are still mornings when hope sneaks in before sense does. The chicken was frying in a cast-iron skillet on the back burner. My mother's recipe, bone in thighs, seasoned the night before, low heat, patience. The smell of it had filled the whole apartment and drifted out the open windows, and I had thought, standing there with a dish towel in my hands, that this was what a good evening felt like. I had already said the prayer I say every morning before my feet touch the floor. That morning it had felt particularly heard. Gerald called at exactly 7:00 p.m. His name is Gerald Watkins. We met in 1982 at a church social in the neighborhood where we both grew up, that quiet cul-de-sac in northeast Philadelphia where families have lived for generations, where people know each other's grandparents and the houses all have porches and the street floods every spring along the storm drain at the end of the block. He was charming. He was confident. He wore clean shoes and remembered names. We were married in 11 months. I picked up the phone because I always picked up when Gerald called. 41 years of conditioning. What I did not know, what I could not have known in that moment, was that there were at least 4 other people already on that line. His sister Renee, his adult son Marcus from his first marriage, and a woman whose voice I did not immediately recognize, though I would come to know exactly who she was. He said it the way you read a verdict, clear and unhurried. 11 words. I want everyone to hear this. Diane, I'm filing for divorce. The marriage is over. I stood there with a folded pillowcase in my hands and the sound of chicken frying and the children outside on the sidewalk and the television on low. And for a long moment, I could not make those 11 words fit inside the room I was standing in. I want you to understand something right now. You may be thinking, why didn't she scream? Why didn't she demand to know who was on that line? Why didn't she hang up? You would be right to think it. But there is a specific kind of shock, the kind that comes not from something completely unexpected, but from something you had almost begun to suspect, that does not make you loud. It makes you very, very still. Like your body already knew and was waiting for your mind to catch up. The woman on the line whose voice I did not recognize was his paralegal. Her name was Jocelyn. She had been helping Gerald restructure his estate for 14 months. I set the phone down on the kitchen table next to the tin box that lives in the back of my closet. That tin box holds $400 in cash. It has lived in that closet for 11 years. It is the only money in this world I knew with certainty was mine. I turned off the chicken. I sat down in the kitchen chair, and I thought about all the things I had chosen not to see for years, and how the one thing I had saved against emergency had been sitting in a tin box in a closet this whole time, as if some part of me had always known that one day I would need it. Something in the air shifted then. Spring in Philadelphia has this particular quality of light at 7 p.m., golden and slanted and a little ruthless. It came through the open window and landed across the kitchen table, right across the tin box like a spotlight. And I thought, Gerald has been planning this for a long time, and I have been folding laundry. Here is the thing about a marriage that is being dismantled from the inside. You do not feel it happening the way you would feel a sudden break. You feel it the way you feel weather changing, slowly, in the joints, long before anyone mentions rain. I want to take you back several years before that Tuesday in April, back to when the small things began, because understanding how I got to that kitchen table, wearing a turquoise blouse, holding a folded pillowcase, listening to 11 words delivered like a legal notice, requires understanding what I believed, and why I kept believing it even when believing it was costing me everything. Gerald worked in property management. He had run a mid-size firm for over 20 years, managing rental properties across Northeast Philadelphia and into the surrounding suburbs. He was good at it. He knew how to talk to people, how to present numbers, how to move through a room like he owned it. And when the pressures of that business began to affect how he treated me, the coldness, the dismissiveness, the way he stopped asking my opinion about anything, I told myself he was tired. That is what I told myself. He is tired. He is under pressure. The market is difficult. The clients are demanding. He will come back to himself. I was justifying. I know that now. But you have to understand. When you have built 40 years of your life inside of a version of a person, you do not easily surrender that version. You protect it. Because protecting it means protecting everything you chose. And I had chosen carefully, or so I believed. Do you know what gaslighting feels like from the inside? It does not feel like being deceived. It feels like being confused. Like the floor keeps shifting slightly, and you keep adjusting your balance, and everyone else in the room seems to be standing perfectly steady, which means the problem must be your footing. He sold the car my sister left me when she passed, a 2004 Honda Civic, nothing fancy, but it was hers. He said we needed the cash flow, that the car was just sitting there, that I never drove it anyway. He was not wrong that I rarely drove it, but it was the only thing my sister had left me, and it was gone before I had finished grieving her. I told myself he was practical. That is what I told myself. Quilting used to bring me real peace. I had made 12 blankets for my grandchildren. 12, one for each grandchild, with patterns I chose specific to each child's personality. Sunflowers for Amara because she was relentlessly cheerful. Navy and gold for Deshaun because he was going to be someone important. I knew it in my bones. The quilts took months each, done by hand at the kitchen table in the evenings. But slowly, those evenings had been taken over by Gerald's needs. He needed me available. He needed dinner at a specific time. He needed the television on a specific channel. He needed me present in the room, even when he was not speaking to me, as if my presence was a resource he wanted access to without necessarily wanting to use it. I stopped quilting. I told myself I would get back to it. I never did. Every Sunday morning, I said my prayer before my feet touched the floor. That prayer was the one place no one could follow me. It was mine. And even in the worst years of that marriage, I held on to it the way you hold on to a railing in the dark. But even faith, when you are isolated enough, starts to feel like it is speaking into a room where no one is listening. The money disappeared in pieces. Pieces I was shown justifications for, one at a time, over years. In 2017, Gerald said we should consolidate our accounts for simplicity, for tax purposes. He was efficient that way, he said. It made sense to have everything in one place. I signed the form giving him access to my pension disbursements and thought nothing more of it. I trusted him the way you trust a person with your life savings after 40 years of marriage, completely, and without documentation. The food memories I carry from those years are not warm ones. Chicken frying in the skillet on a Tuesday evening, yes, but also the many meals I cooked that went uneaten because he was at a business dinner he had not mentioned. The coffee I made every morning that sat cooling while he was on the phone. The birthday cake I baked in 2018 that sat on the counter while he drove to Harrisburg for a meeting he could not reschedule. I want to ask you something directly. Have you ever been made to feel that your memory is faulty? That you are too sensitive, too emotional, too much? Because that was the water I was swimming in for years. Gerald had a particular way of tilting his head slightly when I raised a concern, just tilting it, just slightly, as if he were patiently explaining something to someone who did not quite have the capacity to understand it fully. And I, who had run a household and raised children and managed more complexity than he would ever acknowledge, sat across from that tilted head and questioned my own clarity. But the suspicion was always there. It lived under everything, quiet and persistent. The way a crack in a foundation lives, you cannot see it from the surface, but the house knows it is there. And then one morning in February, 3 months before the phone call, I noticed something. Gerald had left his tablet on the kitchen counter while he was in the shower. A notification appeared on the screen from a legal file-sharing application. The name on the file folder was mine. My name. On a legal file on his tablet. And that quiet, persistent suspicion that had lived under everything for years said, "Look." I looked. I want to be honest with you about what happened to me in the seconds after I opened that file on Gerald's tablet. There is a version of this story where I describe that moment dramatically, where I say the room spun, where I describe my hands shaking so badly I almost dropped the tablet, where I say everything went dark at the edges. And all of that is true. But the truest thing I can tell you is that somewhere underneath the spinning and the shaking and the dark edges, something very cold and very clear had already activated in me. Something that had been waiting a long time to know exactly what it was dealing with. I stopped crying and I started looking. And once I started, I could not stop. The tablet contained scanned documents in a legal file-sharing folder. I stood at the kitchen counter in my robe, with the sound of the shower still running, and I read everything. The 2019 deed transfer that removed my name from the property on the cul-de-sac, where we had lived for over 20 years. I had been in the hospital for a hip procedure that spring. I had trusted him to manage things while I was recovering. There was a signature on that document that was supposed to be mine. I looked at it for a long time. That was not my signature. My mother's pearl earrings, the ones I had kept locked in a jewelry box in the closet of that house, were listed in a personal property inventory with an estimated value and a date of possession. The date was 3 weeks after I moved out. There was a spreadsheet. The spreadsheet tracked 48 months of disbursements, organized by quarter, running from 2017 to 2021. The total was $67,000. The destination was an LLC. The LLC was registered in Marcus's name, Gerald's son from his first marriage. I did not know the LLC existed. I had thought we were comfortable. I had thought we were partners. I had signed over access to my pension disbursements in 2017 for the sake of simplicity, for tax purposes, because Gerald was efficient that way, and $67 dollars had moved quietly from our consolidated account into a company that bore no resemblance to any business I had ever been told about. I photographed every page on the tablet with my phone. Then I set the tablet back exactly where it had been and went into the bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed. I am going to tell you about the mirror moment now because I think it is the most important moment in this entire story. I walked to the bathroom. I stood in front of the mirror, and I looked at the woman standing in it. Not in the dramatic way of movies. I did not press my hands to the glass. I did not crumble. I just stood there and looked. The turquoise blouse I had not yet put on. It was morning. I was still in my robe. My face, which is 75 years old and has earned every one of those years. My hands, which have made 12 quilts by hand and cooked 40 years of dinners and signed without adequate reading, at least 3 documents I should never have signed. And the woman in that mirror looked back at me, and I understood, with a clarity that felt almost peaceful in its sheer completeness, that I had been letting this happen while telling myself elaborate stories about why I was not letting this happen. I had sacrificed my money, my savings, my pension, my cash, on the altar of a belief I needed more than I needed the truth. I had called it trust. I had called it partnership. I had called it marriage. But what I had actually done, over and over and over again for years, was look at the evidence in front of me and choose the version that let me stay. If you are listening to this and you recognize that feeling, that specific quality of willful blindness that comes not from stupidity, but from the sheer cost of the alternative, I want you to know that I see you. I have been you. And I am telling you this story because I found a way out. The tin box was on the shelf in my closet. I opened it, counted the $400 inside, put it back, closed the closet door. Then I sat at the kitchen table with my phone and the photographs I had taken, and I began to write down everything I remembered. Every document, every date, every amount, every conversation where he had tilted his head slightly to the side while I asked a question. I had been confused for a very long time. I was not confused anymore. And I can tell you exactly what that shift feels like in the body. It feels like the temperature dropping, like everything getting very still, like the moment before a decision that cannot be undone. The tin box in my closet had sat there for 11 years, as if some part of me had always known this day would come. And looking at the list I was building on my phone, I thought, I am going to need to be smarter than I've ever been in my life. Gerald did not know I had looked. I needed to keep it that way. 2 weeks after I photographed those documents, my phone rang on a Wednesday afternoon. The number was one I did not immediately recognize, but something made me pick up. That is the only way I can explain it. Something made me pick up. Diane. The voice was warm and immediate in the way of someone who knew you before you became who you became. It's Cecilia. Cecilia Marsh. I know it's been years. I sat down in the kitchen chair the way you sit down when your body decides something before your brain does. Cecilia Marsh. 3rd grade at Jenks Elementary, back in the old neighborhood in West Philadelphia, back when we were small enough to sit 2 to a desk and share pencils. We had been close all through school, and then life had done what life does. She had moved to Baltimore with her first husband. I had stayed in Philadelphia with mine. And the years had opened up between us the way they do, until you realize you are old, and a person you loved as a child is now almost a stranger. We had exchanged Christmas cards through most of the 90s, then not even that. I heard about you and Gerald, she said carefully. Renee told my cousin Brenda. I know that's a chain, but I wanted to call. I did not ask how she knew about Renee. It did not matter how she knew. What mattered was that this woman I had loved as a child before I knew what love cost, had picked up her phone and called me when I needed someone to call. I told her. Not everything at first, the way you don't with anyone at first, because the whole truth is too large and requires a certain amount of trust before you hand it over. But enough. The deed, the pension, the LLC, the spreadsheet with 48 months of my money moving somewhere I had not agreed to and did not know about. Cecilia was quiet for a moment. And then she said something that changed everything. My brother did something similar to me. When my mother passed. The estate. She paused. I know an attorney. a woman named Patricia Holt. She works specifically with seniors in financial exploitation cases. Diane, what happened to you has a name. It's elder financial abuse, and there are legal remedies. Elder financial abuse. I sat with those words for a moment. I had not had a name for it. Having a name for it changed something in me, the way having a diagnosis changes something even when the diagnosis is frightening. It means you are not imagining it. It means it is real. It means other people have been here before you and someone built a structure to address it. Don't move, Cecilia said. Don't call him back. Don't sign anything. Just listen. I listened. Patricia Holt was a 60-year-old attorney based in Center City, Philadelphia, who had built her practice specifically around financial exploitation of older adults. She had seen dozens of cases structured exactly like mine: the pension access transfer, the LLC in a family member's name, the deed transfer during a medical event. She called it a pattern. She said it in the flat, factual way of someone who has seen the pattern so many times it no longer surprises her, which is somehow more chilling than outrage would have been. The deed transfer during your hospitalization is significant, she said at our first meeting. She had the photographs I had sent her on her desk. She was reviewing them the way I imagine a doctor reviews X-rays, looking for the specific thing, not the general picture. If that signature was forged, that is fraud. That is a criminal matter in addition to the civil claims. I want to tell you what it felt like to sit across from someone who believed me completely, without requiring me to convince them, without the tilted head, without the patient explaining to someone who may not quite understand. It felt like setting down something very heavy that I had been carrying so long I had stopped noticing the weight. Cecilia sat next to me in that meeting. She had driven up from Baltimore on a Thursday morning to be there. 73 years old herself, coming up the highway on a Thursday because we had shared pencils in 3rd grade and some things apparently do not expire. The emotional shift that happened in that meeting is difficult to describe precisely. It was not dramatic. There was no moment of sudden fury, no table flipping, no declaration. It was more like watching the light change in a room when someone opens a curtain, gradual, then complete, then irreversible. I had been operating from grief and confusion and a persistent low-grade sadness for years. What replaced those things in that meeting was not exactly anger. It was focus, cold and specific and completely without sentiment. I stopped thinking about what Gerald had taken from me and started thinking about what I was going to do about it. Patricia said the key would be contemporaneous evidence, evidence produced at the time, in Gerald's own words, that could not be dismissed as misremembering or misinterpretation. The photographs of the documents were valuable but could be challenged. What she needed was something Gerald produced himself in real time that showed his intent. We needed him to say it. And I thought about the 41 years I had spent listening to Gerald say things, and I thought, for once in this marriage, I am going to make that work for me. I want to talk about what it takes to look at a person across a dinner table and smile at them when you know what you know. For 3 weeks after the meeting with Patricia Holt, I maintained the exterior of a woman who was still stunned but not yet strategic. I answered Gerald's calls. I kept them brief. I said the things he expected me to say, that I was processing, that this was a lot to absorb, that I needed time. I cooked. I prayed. I sat by the open window in the evenings when the spring air came up from the street, and I thought very carefully about every word I was going to say and every move I was going to make. It is a particular kind of loneliness, performing normalcy while your internal life is a war room. Cecilia called every other day. Not to discuss strategy, Patricia handled strategy, but just to talk, to remind me who I was before Gerald Watkins had spent 41 years quietly editing that person. She told me stories about the neighborhood where we grew up, about the houses with the porches and the storm drain that flooded every spring, and Mrs. Patterson who had the magnolia tree in her front yard and gave children cookies through the screen door in the summer. She reminded me that I had existed before this marriage and that I would exist after it. and that the woman I was at 9 years old, stubborn and funny and paying close attention to everything, was still the woman I was at 75. The liberation I felt during those calls was not dramatic. It was something smaller and more permanent than dramatic. It was the feeling of slowly turning off a phone, not in anger, not in desperation, just the quiet decision that my time, my attention, my presence was mine to decide how to spend. I turned off my phone for 2 hours one afternoon and sat in the garden courtyard below my apartment building and watched sparrows at the bird bath and felt, for the first time in longer than I could calculate, that nothing was required of me. That is what freedom started to feel like. Not big, not loud. 2 hours with sparrows and no one needing anything. Patricia's strategy required me to perform one specific role, a woman who was wavering, who might be persuaded to settle quietly, who might, under the right conditions, sign a quitclaim on a small property. There was a piece of property, a row house in Germantown that I had apparently co-guaranteed in 2020, a fact I had not known until Patricia found it in the document search, that Gerald wanted clear title on. He needed my signature. Patricia said, let him think he might get it. I called Gerald on a Thursday evening. My voice was careful, measured. I told him I had been thinking about the Germantown property, that I did not want a protracted legal battle, that I might be willing to discuss the quitclaim if he would walk me through the documentation. I told him I was tired. I told him I just wanted to understand what I was signing before I signed it. That last part was true. It was the first fully true thing I had said to him in 3 weeks. He came to the apartment the following Thursday at 8 p.m. I had cleaned, I had made coffee. I was wearing a cardigan over a plain blouse. Nothing threatening, nothing dressed up. Patricia had coached me. Ask open questions. Let him explain. Let him talk. Let him believe he is in control of this conversation, because people who believe they are in control talk. My phone was on the coffee table, screen down, recording. The close call came 12 minutes in. Gerald was explaining the LLC, calmly, smoothly, with the specific quality of reassurance he had perfected over decades of convincing me of things. He said something about the Germantown property, and then he glanced at the coffee table and said, "What's that on your phone?" My heart stopped in my chest. I kept my face completely still. "The charging indicator," I said. "It blinks when the battery's low. I keep meaning to get that looked at." I picked up the phone and set it in my lap. "Sorry, you were saying about the property records?" He looked at me for one long second. Gerald has always been good at reading rooms. It is part of what made him successful. And for that 1 second, I genuinely did not know if he could read me. Then he kept talking. I sat in that chair with the phone in my lap and the recording running, and Gerald Watkins explaining to me, in his own clear and unhurried voice, exactly how the LLC had been structured, exactly how the pension disbursements had been directed, and exactly what his plan for the Germantown property had always been. He used the word arrangement 4 times. He used the word my, where the law would have said ours 7 times. And at one point he said, with genuine impatience leaking through the smoothness, "Diane, this was always going to end up this way. I just needed the timing to be right for the business." 41 years. He had been waiting for the timing to be right for the business. I said nothing. I let him finish. I thanked him for coming. I told him I would be in touch about the quitclaim. After he left, I sat in the dark apartment for a long time, not crying, not angry, just sitting with what I had. And what I had was everything. Patricia Holt listened to the recording 3 times. Then she set the phone on her desk and folded her hands and looked at me and said, "This is enough." 2 words, simple and absolute. After years of being told, by Gerald's behavior, by my own doubt, by the accumulated weight of small surrenders, that I was not enough, that my understanding was not enough, that my memory was not enough. Those 2 words hit me somewhere very specific and very deep. The recording, combined with the documents I had photographed from the tablet, gave Patricia what she needed to file both a civil suit for financial exploitation and a formal complaint with the Pennsylvania State Real Estate Commission regarding Gerald's professional conduct in the property transfer. His business operated under a licensed property management certification, and the fraudulent use of a forged signature on a real estate document was a violation of that license. Patricia filed the complaint first, before the civil suit was served, because she wanted the licensing board investigation to begin before Gerald had time to prepare a defense. I want you to understand the precision required here. This was not impulsive. This was not a woman scorned acting out of hurt. This was a 75-year-old woman from a public housing apartment on the 3rd floor in Philadelphia who had documented everything, kept her counsel, performed her role for 3 weeks, recorded the conversation that confirmed everything, and handed all of it to a professional who knew exactly how to use it. This was strategic. This was deliberate. This was a trap. Cecilia came up from Baltimore again for the week the civil suit was filed. She slept on the pull-out sofa in my living room, which she complained about with the specific theatrical suffering of someone who is actually perfectly comfortable but wants you to know she is committed. She made me laugh for the first time in months. We stayed up late talking about the neighborhood where we grew up, about the families who had lived in those houses for generations, about what it had felt like to be girls on those streets before we knew what the world required of us. The civil filing was served to Gerald on a Tuesday. I know the exact day because Patricia's paralegal sent me a text message at 11:03 a.m. that said simply served. I was sitting at the kitchen table when I received that text. The windows were open. Spring in Philadelphia, everything green and loud with birds, chicken frying on the back burner, bone-in thighs, seasoned the night before, my mother's recipe. And somewhere across the city, Gerald Watkins had just been handed a document that told him in legal language that his wife of 41 years had been paying close attention all along. I put the phone down and turned the chicken. Let it fry. Low heat, patience. There is a kind of justice that does not roar. It simply arrives. It arrives in the form of a document, in the form of a recording, in the form of a legal complaint filed with a professional licensing board by an attorney who has dedicated her career to cases exactly like yours. It arrives quietly, the way spring arrives, not all at once, but steadily, until one morning you open the window and the air is different and you understand that the season has changed. Gerald drove a Range Rover in British Racing Green. It had been purchased in 2020, the same year I had apparently co-guaranteed the Germantown property, the same year the LLC was pulling money from our consolidated account at the rate of approximately $400 per month. I had not thought about that vehicle much when he bought it. He said the business required a certain image. He said clients expected a certain standard. I had accepted it the way I had accepted many things, as a fact of his world that I was not quite fully a part of. When Patricia's assistant drove me to the office for our final pre-filing meeting, we stopped at a light on Chestnut Street, and Gerald's green Range Rover was in the next lane. He did not see me. He was on the phone, one hand on the wheel, the posture of a man who has never been accountable to anyone in a car. I watched him pull away through the green light, and I thought, everything you have is documented now, and the documentation belongs to someone who knows exactly what to do with it. The confrontation was coming. I had chosen it to be private, just the two of us, in my apartment, the way the most important things between two people who have spent 41 years together should be. Not a courtroom, not a family gathering, not a phone call with 4 other people listening. Private, face to face, his words and mine and nothing else in the room. I set the date for a Sunday evening. I invited him over. I told him I had made a decision about the Germantown quitclaim. I had, just not the decision he was expecting. He sat across from me at the kitchen table at 7 p.m. on a Sunday in May, and I want to describe him to you in this moment because the visual is important. Gerald Watkins, 69 years old, in the navy sports coat, seated in the chair where he had sat many times over the course of our marriage. Comfortable, relaxed. The posture of a man who expected this meeting to go the way the other meetings had gone, the way all of our meetings had gone for 41 years. He expected to talk. He expected me to listen. He expected to leave with what he came for. I had my phone on the table between us. The recording from Thursday evening 3 weeks ago was queued up. The tin box from the closet was also on the table. Not open, just there. It felt right to have it there. 11 years of emergency cash sitting on the table between us like a quiet witness. He said, "So you've thought about the Germantown property?" "I have," I said. "I've thought about a lot of things." I pressed play. His voice came out of that phone. His own voice, 3 weeks prior, explaining the LLC, the pension disbursements, the timing that had always been right for the business. 4 minutes and 37 seconds of Gerald Watkins explaining, in his own words, the architecture of what he had done. I watched his face. Gerald has spent 41 years being the person in the room who knows more than everyone else. Watching that leave his face was not satisfying in the way revenge is supposed to be satisfying. It was quieter than that. It was like watching a held breath finally release. When the recording ended, I said, "You put me on speaker to announce the divorce. I put you on speaker for the truth." He said nothing. 41 years, I said. You treated it like a lease you were letting expire. He started to speak. He said, "Diane, you have to understand the business." "I understand it perfectly now," I said. "Patricia Holt helped me understand it. She also helped me understand that a forged signature on a real estate document is fraud, and that moving pension disbursements into a family LLC without disclosure or consent is financial exploitation, and that both of those things have legal remedies." The color in his face changed. I watched it change the way you watch weather change when the front comes in. Suddenly and completely. "This is not something you want to do," he said. His voice had gone careful. "You don't know what this will do to the family." There it is. Even now, even in this moment, the threat is wrapped in concern for the family. Even now, it is about what I might do to them, not what has been done to me. "Gerald," I said, and I kept my voice very quiet, because the quieter I was, the more clearly he would hear me. "I know exactly what I'm doing. I have known exactly what I am doing for 3 months. What you did not account for, what you have never accounted for in 41 years, is that I was paying attention." He tried a different approach. He tried the tilted head. He said I was reading things into situations that were not there. He said the LLC had been a protective measure, actually, for both of us. He said the deed transfer had been a mistake by the title company, which he had been meaning to correct. He said the signature, and here his voice went very smooth. The signature on the deed must have been witnessed differently than I remembered. "I was in the hospital," I said. "You may have signed before, Gerald." I said his name, and then I waited until the room was fully quiet. "The Real Estate Licensing Board has already received Patricia's complaint. The civil suit was filed 11 days ago. You were served. This is not a conversation I'm having to decide what to do. This is a conversation I'm having to tell you what has already been done." And that is when I saw it. The moment the machinery behind his eyes stopped. The moment the calculating, the adjusting, the perpetual management of appearances and angles and exits. The moment all of it simply stopped working because there was no angle left. He stood up. He looked at me. And for one moment he looked his actual age, which I had rarely seen, because men like Gerald spend enormous energy not looking their actual age. He looked 69 and tired and completely without his armor. "You could have just talked to me," he said. I looked at him for a long time. Long enough to let that sentence fully exist in the room between us. "I spent 41 years talking to you," I said. "You stopped listening somewhere around 2015. I just didn't know it yet." He left. I sat at the table alone, the tin box in front of me, the phone with the recording, the open windows and the spring evening coming in, the magnolia smell from the courtyard below, the faint sound of children somewhere on the sidewalk. I thought about the woman in the mirror in February, in her robe, looking at her own face, the turquoise blouse, the careful hair, the hands that had made 12 quilts by hand. I thought, she paid attention. She did not look away. She found the people she needed, and she asked for help, and she built something from the ruins while he thought she was still folding laundry. And I thought, there is nothing more dangerous in this world than someone who has been underestimated for 41 years and has finally decided to stop pretending not to know it. The licensing board investigation took 4 months. Patricia had predicted 6, so 4 was better than expected, which is how she described everything, in terms of better or worse than expected, never in terms of surprise, because nothing about how these systems worked surprised her anymore. The Pennsylvania State Real Estate Commission reviewed the complaint, subpoenaed Gerald's business records, and conducted interviews with 3 of his former clients, 2 of whom had their own concerns about his conduct, concerns they had not previously reported because they did not know they could. In September, Gerald Watkins lost his property management license, 22 years of practice, his income, his professional standing, the image he had built across Northeast Philadelphia and into the suburbs, the Range Rover, the Navy sports coat, the posture of a man who owned every room he entered, all of it predicated on a license that a licensing board revoked on a Tuesday morning while I was sitting in my new kitchen in my new neighborhood watching the light come through a garden window. The civil suit concluded 3 months later with a settlement. The court ordered restitution of $52, not the full $67, $00. Patricia had been honest with me about what was recoverable, which was less than what was taken, which is how these things usually work, which made me angry in a specific quiet way that I have made my peace with. $52,000 is not justice in the absolute sense, but it is documentation. It is the record saying, this happened, it was wrong, and there is a cost. Cecilia was with me when Patricia called with the settlement figure. We were eating lunch in the kitchen of my new apartment, the ground floor unit in the old neighborhood in West Philadelphia, the neighborhood where Cecilia and I had grown up, where I had returned after 60 years away. We were eating tomato soup and grilled cheese, which sounds simple but was not. Because it was the first meal I had made in my own kitchen, in my own home, that belonged entirely to me, that was not a performance or an obligation or an offering to someone who was not paying attention anyway. I want to tell you about that apartment, ground floor, garden window on the east side that catches the light in the morning before anything else needs to happen. A closet where the tin box lives, still there, still holding cash, because some habits are wise and should not be broken. A table by the window where I have started quilting again. Not a new project yet, something small, a practice piece, just to remember how the hands know what to do. The neighborhood is the same and entirely different, the way all childhood places are. The houses with the porches are still there. The families who have lived there for generations have cycled into new generations. Mrs. Patterson's magnolia tree is still in her front yard. The house is her granddaughter's house now. But the tree is the same tree, enormous and ancient and not going anywhere. Cecilia lives 20 minutes away. She comes over on Thursdays and brings too much food and complains about the parking and then stays 4 hours. I have not complained about any of this even once. The tin box is still in the closet, but now, when I count what is inside, it is not the last money I have in the world. It is a choice. There is a difference between money kept from fear and money kept from wisdom. And I understand that difference now in my body rather than just my mind. I took the $400 from the tin box to a woman named Renata at a credit union 3 blocks from my new apartment and opened an account in my name with no one else's name anywhere on the documentation. My own name, my own account, my own wealth, small as it is, managed by me, accountable to me, documented by me. It was the most ordinary transaction in the world, and it was the most significant thing I had done in years. The key object, that tin box, has sat in 3 closets over the course of my life. In the house on the cul-de-sac, in the apartment on the 3rd floor, and now here in this ground floor unit where the light comes in clean every morning. The first time it held emergency against a future I hoped would not come. The second time it was the only thing in the world that was mine. The third time it holds what it should always have held, not desperation, not last resort, but simply my money, kept carefully by a woman who has learned what careful means. The debt Gerald owes me is not fully paid in dollars. It never will be. What was taken was not only fortune, it was years. Choices made from incomplete information. The quilts I did not make because my evenings were not my own. The car my sister left me. The simple dignity of being treated like a partner in the business of a shared life. But I do not carry that debt as a weight anymore. I set it down, not because he deserves to be let off from it, but because I am 75 years old, and I have lived long enough to know that the heaviest thing you can carry is someone else's accountability for their own actions. I documented it. I reported it. I let the systems that exist for exactly this purpose do their work. And then I walked into the morning light coming through a garden window in the old neighborhood and thought about what I wanted for breakfast. The final destination was always here. This neighborhood, these streets, the porch houses and the families, and Mrs. Patterson's magnolia tree. The place where I existed before any of this, where the woman I was at 9 years old is still clearly visible if you know how to look for her. I am looking for her every morning. It is late October now. The windows are closed again, Philadelphia autumn, the kind that comes in serious and clean, turning everything amber and copper and a specific color of red that you really only see in October in this part of the country. The garden window on the east side of my apartment frames a maple tree that has gone entirely red. And every morning I drink my coffee and look at that tree the way I used to look at the open windows in spring, with something like gratitude and something like disbelief that I get to be here for this. 6 months ago, I was in a third-floor apartment with open windows and a turquoise blouse and a phone call coming in at exactly 7 p.m. that rearranged the entire topography of my life. And now, I am here. Same city, different neighborhood, different light, different version of myself, though I would not describe it as different so much as returned. Returned to a woman who had been standing at a distance from her own life for a long time and has now come back fully into it. Gerald lost his license in September. The settlement was finalized in December of last year. I do not know much about his current circumstances, and I do not seek that information. Not because I am performing indifference, but because I am genuinely, thoroughly done with that account. The ledger of what he owes is documented in a courthouse. That is sufficient. My peace does not depend on his suffering. That is something I did not know before this year. I thought justice would feel like watching someone fall, but justice, the real kind, the kind that actually reconstructs you. It feels like putting down the weight of watching. It feels like the morning you wake up and realize you have not thought about them since yesterday afternoon, and that is normal now and will continue to be normal. I have started quilting again in earnest. I am making a new quilt, not for a grandchild, not as an obligation, not as something to do with my hands while I wait for something else. I am making it for the garden window. Deep greens and amber and that specific October red, the colors of a season that knows how to let things go gracefully. Cecilia brought me tomato seeds last month. We are planning a container garden for spring. She has opinions about soil depth that she has communicated at length and with considerable passion, and I have listened to all of them. And in the spring, we will see whose approach produces actual tomatoes. I intend to win. She is aware. Now I want to speak to you directly, not as a woman telling her story, but as someone who has been through something that has a name and a pattern and a body of knowledge built around it, and who wants you to have that knowledge if you need it. What happened to me is called elder financial abuse. And I want you to understand that it is not rare. A 2012 study revealed that 1 in 4 nursing home residents suffered physical abuse. And where physical abuse exists, financial abuse follows the same patterns of isolation, control, and the systematic destruction of a person's ability to understand or manage their own resources. The WHO estimates that nearly 16% of seniors in communities suffer financial, emotional, or physical abuse every year, which means that if you are listening to this in a room with other people, the chances are significant that someone in your circle has experienced this or will. The tactics are almost always the same. Consolidate the accounts, for simplicity, for tax purposes. Discourage independent legal advice. You don't need to pay another attorney, we can handle this ourselves. Remove the name from documents during a period of vulnerability, surgery, illness, grief. Move money gradually, in amounts small enough to go unnoticed individually but devastating in aggregate. Isolate the person from the allies who would notice. Reframe every question as an overreaction. Here is what I want you to take from my story. Keep records. Keep accounts in your own name. Never sign a document you have not read in full and discussed with an attorney who represents only your interests, not the interests of the family or the estate or the partnership. If someone is managing your finances and you cannot see the documentation of exactly where your money is and exactly where it goes, that is not a partnership. That is a situation. And keep the tin box. Not because you expect disaster, but because a person who has resources that are entirely their own, even small resources, even $300-400 in a closet, has options. Options are power. Options are the thing that makes it possible, when the phone rings at 7 p.m., to not be completely without recourse. The fortune you protect is not only money, it is choices. It is time. It is the ability to pick up the phone and call an attorney and say, I have documentation, and I need you to tell me what it means. Cecilia resurfaces when she is needed. The right people always do, if you have not completely let them go. And someday, not as a fantasy, but as a plan, I am going to buy a Range Rover in British Racing Green. I am going to drive it down these streets in spring with the windows down, past the porch houses and the magnolia tree, and all the families who have lived here for generations. Past every place that remembers who I was before I forgot to be her. And it will not be an act of revenge. It will be an act of arrival. I am already here. The car is just the punctuation. Now I want to know something. Where are you listening from right now? Scroll down and tell me your city. I read every single comment, and it matters to me more than you know. And if there is someone in your life who is over 60 and managing their finances alone, or with someone who discourages questions, share this story with them. Not as a warning, but as a reminder. Documentation, independent counsel, their own account in their own name. These things are available. These things can be the difference. If this story meant something to you, if you recognize something in the turquoise blouse or the tin box or the recording that played at a kitchen table on a Sunday evening, press like. Let me know it landed. And subscribe so you are here for the next story, because there are more. And they all belong to women who paid close attention when everyone expected them not to. My name is Diane. I am 75 years old. I live on the ground floor now, where the light comes in clean. Good morning.